Commandant Veth set the recording lens on the table between them like a declaration of war. Its single blue eye held steady on Veth's face, patient as a surgeon. Start from the beginning, the Commandant said. 72 hours before the Crucible. Everything you observed about the human. Veth's secondary eyelids drew across her pupils, the crystalline membrane that other species always mistook for a blink but was closer to a steel door sliding shut. She had 6 hours of debriefing left. She had been awake for 31. In a moment she would begin talking, and once she started, she knew she would not be able to make the story sound the way the Commandant expected it to sound. His name is Marcus Reyes, she said. He arrived at Sector Assembly the same morning the roster posted. Squad 7, my squad. The Commandant's quill stylus touched the record pad. Your reaction? Veth considered the question with the full weight it deserved. 3 years at the Thessian Accord Unified Academy. 3 years of building the cleanest performance record in the Cadet Corps. Fastest environmental adaptation scores in her cohort. Highest tactical simulation ratings among the non-combat track entrants. Squad 7 had been her architecture. She had chosen every member herself based on complementary capability profiles, and then the Academy's administrative system had inserted a human into the 6th slot 48 hours before the Crucible finals. My reaction, she said carefully, was that the Academy had made a logistical error. 72 hours before the Crucible, the assembly hall smelled of reprocessed air and anxiety. 43 cadets from 12 species stood in the formation grid while the duty officer read squad assignments from a hovering data slate, her voice flat and procedural. Veth stood at attention in the 3rd row, arms folded against her thorax in the crystalline formal rest position, which to most other species looked like a posture of mild arrogance. She was good at that. She heard Reyes before she saw him, a soft exhale of breath through a respiratory system that needed far more oxygen than the hall's standard mix. The human had requested no atmospheric accommodation. She had read that in the intake report, one of the 7 intake reports she had pulled and studied the night before. He had signed the standard environmental waiver and then, apparently, simply adapted. When the duty officer called Squad 7's names, Veth turned to assess what the Academy had given her. Marcus Reyes was unremarkable in the way that only extremely deliberate people manage to be. Medium height for a human, which made him shorter than Veth by about 2 handspans. The Academy issue uniform fit him without alteration. He had not requested the standard, human modifications to the collar ventilation system. His face held the expression of someone doing arithmetic, not nervous arithmetic. Just ordinary calculations, the kind you run when you are in a new room and automatically note the exits. He caught her looking and gave a small nod. Veth did not nod back. She turned to face the duty officer and began organizing the problem. The Crucible was the Thessian Accord Academy's final evaluation, a 72-hour continuous field operation conducted on a live simulation planet, with real environmental hazards, real resource scarcity, and an adversarial AI proctor that escalated difficulty in real time based on squad performance. Squads were scored as a unit. Every member's performance fed the collective result. One weak link did not merely drag the score. Under the Crucible's multiplied outcome algorithm, one member performing below cohort baseline could reduce the squad's final grade by up to 40%. Veth had been planning for the Crucible for 11 months. She had not planned for a human. She fell into formation beside the det to her left, Dosa, a Fenric with 4 arms and the best endurance metrics in the squad, and spoke quietly, enough that only Dosa's lateral hearing membranes would catch it. Have you seen the human's training file? Dosa's upper pair of arms shifted in the Fenric gesture for mild concern. Partial access. His combat simulation scores are unlisted. Redacted or absent? Absent. The field is blank. Veth processed that. Blank fields in the Academy system meant one of 3 things. Administrative error, a cadet who had not yet completed the relevant assessments, or a cadet whose record was sealed above the access level of other cadets. None of those options improved her assessment of the situation. Squad 7's 6th slot had been occupied until 36 hours ago by Cadet Oren, a Thessian, same species as Veth, whose performance profile she had selected with precision. Oren had fractured 2 load-bearing struts in his right joint cluster during a routine sparring session and had been pulled from the Crucible roster. The academy system had filled his slot automatically, pulling from a list of available cadets, and had produced Marcus Reyes. Veth was going to have to talk to the human. She waited until the assembly dispersed and the squad was moving toward the preparation bay. She positioned herself beside Reyes as they walked, matching his pace. He moved with an unhurried efficiency that she noted but did not comment on. Cadet Reyes, Cadet Veth. He already knew her name. She had not introduced herself. Squad 7's point coordinator. I read the public portions of your file. That made her secondary eyelids draw again. You read the files. Seemed worth doing. A slight pause. You have the best squad coordination scores in the cohort. Everybody knows that. There was nothing hostile in his voice, nothing flattering either. It was, Veth realized, a plain statement of observable fact delivered by someone who considered plain facts to be sufficient. Your combat simulation scores are not listed in your file, she said. No. She waited for elaboration. Reyes did not offer any. They walked into the preparation bay, where the rest of Squad 7 was already organizing equipment loads. Koss, the squad's Valeth navigator, violet-skinned and preternaturally calm, glanced at Reyes and then at Veth with the particular quality of attention that meant she was running an assessment of her own. Prin, the Suleki medic whose bioluminescent patches flickered in patterns that served as the species' emotional display, showed a rapid yellow pulse that meant something between curiosity and wariness. Dasa had already started pre-checking the squad's environmental gear, all 4 arms moving in practiced coordination. They were a good squad. Veth had built something real here. She was not going to let a blank-fielded human cadet dismantle 11 months of coordination architecture. 48 hours before it mattered. I need to know your capability baseline, she said, not for my comfort, for tactical planning. Reyes set down the equipment pack he'd been issued and looked at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize, not defensiveness, not the particular stiffness cadets showed when they were being assessed and knew it. Something else. What do you need to plan for? He asked. The Crucible's AI proctor scales to squad performance in real time. If any member falls below cohort baseline in any evaluated category, the difficulty scaling punishes the whole unit. I need to know where you are in physical endurance, environmental adaptation, navigation under sensory reduction, and tactical decision speed, so I can plan around gaps. The word gaps was clinical. Veth meant it clinically. She was not sure he took it that way. Reyes was quiet for 3 seconds. Then my endurance is fine. Environmental adaptation, you can check the atmospheric waiver I signed. Navigation, I'll need to calibrate to your equipment protocols. Give me an hour with the hardware before we drop. Tactical decision speed. He paused. You'll see it when it matters. That is not an answer I can plan around. No, he agreed, it isn't. Veth held his gaze for a moment. His eyes were the dark brown of deep-water minerals, and they held the same quality of unhurried attention that his walk had. He was not performing calm. He simply was calm the way a piece of dense material is dense, not by choice, just structurally. She turned to the rest of the squad. Preparation check begins now. Dasa, environmental load distribution. Koss, navigation package calibration. Prin, medical kit inventory. Reyes, familiarize yourself with the communication relay system. We integrate in 90 minutes. The squad moved. Reyes moved with them, picking up the communication relay manual without looking at her again. Veth watched him for precisely 3 seconds before turning to her own work. 60 hours before the Crucible, the pre-drop briefing confirmed what Veth had already mapped. Sector 9 of the simulation planet. Temperate zone converted to active crisis parameters. The Proctor AI would randomize environmental hazards from a list that included seismic events, flooding, toxic atmospheric blooms, and coordinated adversarial drone incursions. The squad's objectives were to establish a sustainable operating base, extract a data cache from coordinates that would be revealed 40 hours in, and maintain full squad integrity through the final assessment window. Squads that lost members received proportional deductions. Squads where all members completed the objective together received a cohesion multiplier that could raise a borderline score to distinction. Cohesion multiplier. Veth had been planning around that multiplier for 11 months. She ran the 90-minute integration session with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed it. Communication relay protocols, equipment load assignments calibrated to each member's physical parameters, decision hierarchy in case of split contact scenarios. Prin recorded everything in the squad's shared medical file. COS ran 3 navigation calibrations and found a firmware irregularity in the drop zone mapping system that would have cost them 20 minutes of positioning time. She logged it and patched it in 6. Reyes completed the communication relay familiarization without asking a single question. He handed the manual back, recited the 12 critical relay protocols in order when Veth tested him, and then sat down on a prep crate and ate a meal from a sealed ration pack while the others continued working. Dasa leaned toward Veth and said, very quietly, he eats before a drop. I noticed. Is that human protocol? I don't know. Veth looked at Reyes. He was eating with the methodical patience of someone performing maintenance, not pleasure, just necessary function. It might be. She filed the observation without knowing yet what category to put it in. That evening, with 18 hours remaining before the drop, she ran a private analysis of every publicly available data point she had on human physiological performance under sustained stress. The literature was thinner than she expected. Most of the Academy's xenobiology records on humans covered the standard medical parameters: oxygen requirements, temperature tolerances, sleep cycles. The tactical performance data was fragmented across a dozen classified files she did not have access clearance for. She did find one record, a training evaluation written by an instructor at the Meridian border station who had supervised a cohort of human exchange cadets 4 years prior. The instructor, a Thessian as it happened, which meant the clinical vocabulary was familiar, had written, "Human cadets demonstrate nonlinear response to sustained physical and psychological load. Where other species show predictable degradation curves, human performance is characterized by irregular plateaus interrupted by abrupt capacity increases that do not correspond to any identifiable recovery event. Recommend adjusting all assessment models for human cohorts to avoid systematic underprediction. Nonlinear response, irregular plateaus, abrupt capacity increases." Veth read that paragraph 4 times. Then she closed the file and stared at the wall of her quarters for a while. She had built a squad. She had a plan. She was going to have to hold both of them with open hands. 48 hours before the Crucible, the incident happened that Veth had been tracking as a statistical probability since Reyes joined the squad. The Academy's pre-Crucible social dynamic was a predictable system. Cadets under pressure sought to offload anxiety through dominance demonstrations, identifying a perceived weak point in another squad's composition and pressing it. Squad 7's new 6th member was the most conspicuous weak point in the cadet corps at the moment, and Veth had known it was only a matter of time before someone decided to press. She had calculated 48 hours as the outer boundary. She had been optimistic by 12 hours. Cadet Orvin Sek was Squad 3's tactical lead, broad-shouldered, a Thessian of the mountain subspecies with bone density that registered on the standard force gauges at twice the cohort average. He had been performing his own anxiety offloading for 2 days in the form of visible skepticism about Squad 7's Crucible readiness, and that evening in the preparation common area he escalated from visible to vocal. "The human hasn't posted combat simulation scores," Orvinsek said. He was not speaking to Reyes. He was speaking to the room, which happened to contain Reyes. No scores means no baseline. No baseline means your squad's cohesion multiplier is theoretical. Reyes was sitting with his back to the wall, the same position he seemed to default to in shared spaces. He was reviewing a topographic map of Sector 9 on a data slate. He did not look up. "It means the scores are unlisted," Veth said, keeping her voice level, "which is not the same thing. In this academy, unlisted means unverified." Orvinsek's attention finally moved to Reyes directly. "A polite academy would have given you more preparation time. The Crucible is not the place to discover whether a cadet has survivable parameters." Reyes looked up from the data slate. The topographic map was still visible on the screen. Veth caught a glimpse of it and noted that he had marked 6 different elevation features with small notations. He had been studying the terrain. "I appreciate the concern," Reyes said. His voice was utterly without edge. No sarcasm, no heat, no performance of patience, just the statement delivered as fact. Orvin stared at him for a moment, clearly recalibrating. This was not the response he had prepared for. "If you fall behind in the field," he said, "your squad pays for it." "Yes," Reyes agreed. "That's how the scoring works." He went back to the map. Orvin Sek stood in the common area for another few seconds, which was several seconds longer than his dignity could comfortably sustain, and then he left. Veth watched the space where he had been. Then she looked at Reyes, who had not looked up from the terrain notations, and she noticed something. Dasa was sitting 2 body lengths to Reyes's left, and Dasa's upper arms had not uncrossed since Orvin Sek raised his voice. Prin's bioluminescent patches showed a deep blue that was, in Selecki emotional vocabulary, preparedness. Koss had quietly moved her chair so that it placed her between Reyes and the room's main entrance. They had not been coordinating. They had simply moved. Veth filed that observation in a category she had not previously needed, the category of things she had not planned for but which appeared to be happening anyway. 24 hours before the Crucible, Veth ran the squad through a final equipment check and then gave them 8 hours of rest time. She did not sleep. She sat in the preparation bay and reviewed the Crucible parameters for the 37th time and tried to find the variable she was most afraid of. She had identified it before Reyes joined the squad. She identified it again now with more clarity. The cohesion multiplier was real and the objective was achievable, and the squad's skill profiles were genuinely complementary, and she had done everything right. But none of that mattered if the AI proctor found the squad's weak point in the first 20 hours and hammered it until someone made a decision under pressure that broke the architecture. The proctor was designed to find weak points. It was very good at its job. The question was not whether she had planned well. The question was whether the plan would survive contact with a proctor that had studied 400 squads and knew exactly what a well-planned squad looked like at the moment its planning stopped working. She was not the only one still awake. Through the preparation bay's interior window she could see the common room, where 2 cadets from Squad 3 were running a last-minute equipment diagnostic at one of the shared stations. They were good cadets, competent, focused, showing the signs of well-managed pre-operation tension. They would do well in the Crucible. Orvin Sek's squad had a genuine tactical profile and a leader who pushed hard. She found herself thinking, unexpectedly, that she hoped they did well. Not in competition with Squad 7, just as a thing she hoped for separately, the way you hope a storm clears before it becomes a disaster. She examined that thought for a moment. It was not the kind of thought she usually had about competitive peers. She attributed it to fatigue and went back to her parameter review. She was still sitting in the preparation bay when she heard footsteps, and Reyes came in and sat on a prep crate across from her. He did not apologize for the hour or explain what had brought him there. He simply sat and after a moment said, "You haven't slept. I'm reviewing parameters." "You've reviewed them 36 times. He said it without accusation. "I saw the access log on the shared terminal." Veth considered several responses and chose honesty, partly because it was the most efficient option and partly because Reyes seemed like someone for whom performance of confidence would register as exactly what it was. "I am not certain I have accounted for every failure point." "No," he said. "You haven't, you can't. That's what the Crucible is for." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Actual paper. Physical, the kind of anachronistic material that humans apparently still used for some purposes. He unfolded it and set it on the crate between them. It was the topographic map, annotated in a handwriting she could not read. "I found 3 natural shelter positions in Sector 9 that the official briefing map doesn't flag," he said. "The AI proctor will know about them because it built the simulation, but the proctor prioritizes pressure testing behavioral responses. It won't use those positions against us unless we find them first and use them. So if we get there before it expects, we establish our base in a location the proctor hasn't waited into its first escalation window." Veth looked at the map, at the 3 marked positions, at the notations she couldn't read but whose precision she could recognize regardless of language. "You identified these from the briefing topographic data and the standard geological survey for that biome type. The Academy Library has them. They're not restricted. She reached across and touched the map. The paper was warm from his pocket. How long did this take you? She said. The terrain analysis? About 3 hours. And the rest of the time since you received the briefing? Reading about Thetian crystalline biology, he said. The literature on your sensory adaptation in low-light environments is interesting. You have a natural edge on the night operations window. The proctor will know that too, but there's a category of infrasound navigation that your species does instinctively that almost nothing in the Academy literature accounts for. If we're in position to use that edge during the night window instead of fighting it. Veth was very still. You have been preparing the squad's strategy, she said. I've been thinking about what I can contribute to yours, a careful distinction. You've built something that works. I'm not going to take it apart and rebuild it. But there might be pieces I can add. She looked at the map for a long moment, then she said, show me the infrasound navigation hypothesis. He talked for 90 minutes. She listened, asked questions, pushed back on 2 assumptions, found that one of them held under scrutiny, and one of them shifted. A better answer emerged from the collision. By the time they were done, the pre-dawn light had begun touching the preparation bay's high windows with pale gray, and the squad's tactical plan had a third layer it had not possessed before. Reyes refolded the paper map and put it back in his pocket. Get some sleep, he said. 4 hours minimum. The proctor targets decision fatigue early. It's the first variable it can control. He left before she could respond. Veth sat in the pale gray light and understood that she had spent 48 hours being afraid of a variable, and the variable had spent those same 48 hours quietly making the plan better. She got 4 hours of sleep. It was the best 4 hours she had managed since the roster posted. The night before the drop, Veth ran a final capability inventory in her quarters and arrived at the same place she always arrived. Everything accounted for, every variable mapped, every contingency assigned a response protocol. She had done everything that could be done. She had the cleanest pre-Crucible preparation record in the cohort, and the squad she had built was ready and the plan was sound, and she still sat in the dark of her quarters for an hour after the lights-out signal without sleeping, turning the blank field in Reyes's record over in her mind like a stone she could not put down. She was still awake when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. They stopped at her door, then continued past. She could not say why she was certain it was Reyes. The corridor was standard Academy construction and footsteps in it were generic acoustic data. But she was certain, the way she had been certain of things during the Crucible itself, and she found when she examined the certainty that it was not a prediction or an extrapolations, but simply a knowledge that her mind had assembled from the 48 hours of observational data without announcing what it was doing. She had been learning his step. She had not noticed she was doing it. In the morning, she found a note slipped under her door. It was on paper, the same material as the topographic map, the same handwriting she could not read. Below the handwriting was a careful diagram. The rally point in Sector 9, the 6 deployment pod trajectories and small arrows indicating a modified ground coverage pattern that would put all 6 squad members at the point within 90 seconds of the last pod landing. He had found a way to shave 40 seconds off the assembly time. She tucked the note into her jacket pocket, next to where she kept her own briefing documents, and went to breakfast. The drop was a controlled freefall through the simulation planet's upper atmosphere in individual deployment pods, the 6 of them hitting Sector 9's temperate canopy within 90 seconds of each other. Veth's pod grounded in a shallow ravine 12 meters from the primary rally point she had designated, which was within acceptable parameters. She cracked the seal, pulled her equipment pack, and was already moving before her secondary eyelids had finished adjusting to the ambient light. Natural light here was red-shifted, filtered through a canopy of broad-leafed vegetation with a spectral signature that made the whole world look like it was running slightly behind. Veth's crystalline visual processing handled the shift faster than most species could. She had read the geological survey, she had known what to expect, but the body's adjustment still took 60 seconds that she used to move and orient rather than stand and wait. Koss touched down 40 meters north and was at the rally point before Veth. Dasa came in 30 seconds after, one pack slightly off-center from a bad drop angle, already correcting it as she walked. Prin arrived last of the original 5, bioluminescent patches cycling rapidly through the amber to white spectrum that meant acute sensory processing. Reyes was already at the rally point. He had grounded 212 meters from it, Veth later calculated from the deployment log. He had covered the distance in under 4 minutes through unfamiliar terrain without a navigation assist. He was sitting on a route formation when she arrived, the annotated paper map in his hand, looking at the canopy with the same arithmetic expression he had worn in the assembly hall. "Winds from the northeast," he said. "Light atmospheric toxin marker on the leading edge, not hazardous yet, but the Proctor will probably develop it into a full-bloom event in the next 6 to 10 hours. We want our base established before that window." Veth consulted her environmental scanner. The toxin marker was there, faint, exactly where he had indicated. "Confirmed," she said. "We moved to shelter position 2. Das's upper arms opened in mild surprise. Position 2 was the second of Reyes's 3 additions to the plan, not the primary position designated in the original briefing. Veth caught the look and answered it. "The Proctor will anticipate our primary. We take position 2, we control the night operations window." The squad moved. Shelter position 2 was a natural rock formation elevated 12 meters above the sector's mean ground level, backed by a dense mineral outcropping that would scatter scanner signals and fronted by a natural water source that the Geological Survey had flagged as non-toxic. The approach was covered by a ridgeline that blocked sight lines from 3 of the Proctor's 4 primary drone surveillance corridors. It took them 40 minutes to reach it, and in those 40 minutes the Proctor made its first move, a seismic tremor, mild, calibrated to force a route deviation. Standard first window pressure test. Veth called the deviation without losing pace. Koss adjusted the navigation track in real time. The tremor rolled through, cracked 2 medium trees across their path, and left them with a 90-second delay and no casualties. She heard the Proctor's escalation system click 1 level. She did not have direct access to its internal scoring, but she could feel it in the way a tactician feels pressure. Good. The Proctor had expected more than 90 seconds. They established the base in 45 minutes. Dasa ran load-bearing checks on the outcropping, while Prin inventoried the medical kit and flagged the toxin bloom as a priority watch item. Koss mapped the water source and ran a contamination analysis that came back clean. Reyes disappeared into the vegetation for 12 minutes and came back with a bundle of broad-leafed branches that he wove, with a casual speed that made Prin's patches go briefly white, into a windbreak that extended the base's shelter coverage by a third. "You know field weaving?" Dasa said, watching him. "Grew up outdoors," Reyes said, "more or less." That was the entirety of the explanation he offered. Dasa looked at Veth. Veth looked at the windbreak, which was structurally sound and functionally effective and had taken him 12 minutes. She added it to her running file of things Reyes had done that she had not anticipated. The file was getting long. Hour 14 of the Crucible was when the Proctor decided to stop being polite. In the 7 hours between base establishment and the Proctor's first serious escalation, the squad had settled into the particular rhythm that Veth had been trying to engineer for 11 months. Dasa ran equipment maintenance checks on a rotating schedule without being reminded. Koss updated their navigational position map every 2 hours, cross-referencing the Geological Survey data with real-time scanner readings to refine the accuracy margin. Prin set up a medical monitoring station at the base's most sheltered point and ran passive environmental scans with the quiet efficiency of someone who had decided that preventive medicine was more interesting than reactive medicine. Reyes built a second windbreak on the base's exposed northern face. Nobody had asked him to. He simply looked at the gap in the shelter coverage, went into the vegetation, came back and solved it. By the time Veth noticed, it was already done, and Dasa was running her hands along the structural joins with the expression of someone evaluating workmanship. "Better than the first one," Dasa said. "Different materials," Reyes said. "Had to adapt the technique." Veth noted this without comment. She was building a longer list of things she was noting without comment. The list had begun to feel less like a tactical log and more like something else. A record, maybe, of the gap between what she had planned and what was actually happening. The toxin bloom developed as Reyes had predicted, arriving 4 hours earlier than Veth had factored into the original plan. The proctor had noted their advanced positioning and accelerated its timeline in response. Prin managed the medical response protocol with 3 minutes to spare before the bloom density crossed into hazardous range. The squad's sealed respiratory gear performed exactly as tested. No casualties. But the proctor had also been running a second pressure while they managed the bloom. A drone incursion on the base's eastern approach, 3 units moving into pattern designed to test whether a squad managing an environmental crisis would neglect perimeter security. Standard double-bind pressure. Veth had briefed for it. Koss detected the incursion on passive scanner 11 minutes before contact range. She flagged it without breaking from the toxin management protocol she was assisting Prin with. That was the result of 2 years of training and 41 hours of coordination, and a calm that Veth had selected her for specifically. Reyes handled the intercept. Veth watched it from the base's elevated observation point, through the filtered light and the faint chemical haze of the bloom's tail edge. He moved through the eastern approach with a quality of ground contact that she had not seen in any cadet file and could not find a category for. Not silence exactly, not camouflage, something more like the absence of announcement, like a stone that happens to be where it is. The drones were acoustic and visual. They were looking for movement and heat signature, which he had apparently accounted for, because he moved through their scanning cone with a 45-degree angle of approach that kept him in the interference shadow of the mineral, outcropping until he was inside their minimum detection radius. He disabled all 3 in just under 2 minutes. She did not see what he used. When she descended from the observation point and examined the drones, she found that each one had been immobilized by a targeted mechanical disruption to its primary sensory array, a precise intervention that required knowing exactly where the array was housed in that drone model. The Academy's equipment manual listed that information on page 94 of the Tactical Hardware Supplement. She had read page 94. She had not thought to plan around it the way Reyes had planned around it. Weapons qualification, she said, when he came back to the base. It was not a question exactly. It was a statement in question form. I've qualified, he said, on drone-class tactical units specifically. He looked at her with that unhurried attention and said, the scores are unlisted. She understood then that the blank field in his record was not an absence. It was a sealed door, and behind it was a room she did not have clearance to see, and whatever was in that room was sufficient to disable 3 adversarial drones in 2 minutes without a weapon she could identify. She made a decision in that moment, a clean, tactical decision that she would have made regardless of any other variable. She trusted the capability. She did not need to understand the clearance level to use what it produced. The proctor knows we're at 2/3 of our escalation budget, she said. It will save the strongest pressure for the data cache extraction window. That's standard proctor doctrine, maximum difficulty at maximum objective proximity. Yes, Reyes agreed. I want to adjust the extraction approach. If we use the infrasound navigation window you identified, we can move the extraction window to a night cycle slot that the proctor hasn't weighted heavily. But it requires Prin to manage the bloom aftermath independently while the rest of us move. Prin's patches cycled to a deep, steady green, the Suleki color for confident capability. Prin stays at base, Reyes said. Koss navigates. Dasa carries the heavy extraction equipment. You coordinate. I'll handle the proctor's intercept response. The division of roles was clean and correct and matched the squad's capability profiles precisely. He had reached the same tactical conclusion she had through an independent analysis. Agreed, Veth said. Dasa made a sound, not a word. A purely Fenric vocalization of the type that accompanied the recognition of something unexpected. Veth glanced at her. Dasa's expression was complicated, not alarm. Something closer to a recalibration of categories, which was not a look Veth had seen on Dasa's face before. What? Veth said. Nothing, Dasa said. Nothing. Yes, agreed. The night operation began at hour 19. Veth had known about her own infrasound navigation in the way she knew about many of her species' biological inheritances, abstractly, as documented capability, not as lived experience. The Academy's standard training did not develop it. The physical conditions required to trigger it reliably were specific. Low ambient light, sub-threshold acoustic environment, minimal electromagnetic interference. Sector 9's night cycle provided all three. It came online 40 minutes after they left the base. She became aware of it gradually, the way you become aware of your own heartbeat when the room goes quiet enough. It had been there all along. It simply had not been audible over the noise. The sector's geological substrate had a vibration signature at 17 cycles per second, below the threshold of conscious hearing, but not below the threshold of the crystalline resonance chambers in her lower thorax. The ground was speaking, and she understood it. She stopped walking. "Veth," Koss said, "give me a moment." The map of Sector 9 assembled itself in her mind with a precision that no scanner could match. She was not seeing it. She was feeling it. The difference between reading a navigation chart and knowing where you are. The data cache coordinates were 900 meters northeast. Between her position and those coordinates, 2 natural ridgelines, 1 dry creek bed, and 3 drone monitoring positions that the Proctor had deployed in the last 6 hours. She knew where the drones were. She could feel their mechanical vibration against the sector's geological baseline. "Northeast," she said, 50 meters, angle left of the ridgeline. "There's a drone positioned at the gap you'd naturally take." Reyes did not ask how she knew. He adjusted his line of movement without comment, and the others followed. The infrasound navigation did not make her faster. It made her certain, which was a different thing, and in this context a more valuable one. She moved through the night sector with the precision of someone who has already been there, the Proctor's pressure architecture becoming visible around her in the same way that a pattern becomes visible when you step back far enough to see the shape. The Proctor escalated twice during the extraction approach, a second drone incursion and a seismic event targeted at the creekbed crossing. Both times Veth knew where the pressure was coming from before the squad hit it. Both times they moved around it without contact. Reyes stayed close to her left flank, not hovering, not managing, just positioned. She did not need protection. What she was aware of, without examining it too closely, was that his presence on her left side freed her crystalline resonance chambers from having to monitor that vector independently. He was covering an angle, quietly, without being asked. The data cache was a sealed environmental unit buried under 3 meters of geological substrate at the designated coordinates. Standard Crucible retrieval operation. Excavate, verify, extract intact. DOS's forearm configuration made the excavation take 20 minutes instead of 40. Koss verified the unit's seal integrity in under 3. Veth collected the extraction authentication and flagged completion to the Proctor's monitoring system. 17 minutes ahead of the extraction window she had planned around. The Proctor's response was 3 seconds of silence, and then a single drone sweep, perfunctory, almost mechanical, that passed over their position and moved on. It was, she recognized, the sound of a system acknowledging that a variable had not behaved as predicted. They made it back to base without contact. Prin's patches went vivid gold when they came through the perimeter, the Sulecki display for genuine relief, and then settled into a warm amber. That meant contentment. Dasa set down the extraction unit and stood with all 4 arms at her sides in the Fenric resting posture that meant the body has done what it came to do, Koss said. 12 hours left in the evaluation window. We hold position, Veth said. The Proctor's escalation budget is at maximum. It will run 2 final pressure events and then close the window. We've already demonstrated cohesion. We hold. She sat down against the mineral outcropping. After a moment, Reyes sat nearby, and then Dosa lowered herself to the ground, and Koss settled cross-legged on the opposite side. Prin was already half reclined, monitoring the toxin bloom's dissipation on a passive scanner. They sat in the red-shifted dark of Sector 9, 5 cadets and 1 human, and the world's geological substrate sang its 17-cycle song, and the Proctor ran its calculations. And Veth noticed, without quite intending to, that the shape of the group around her was the shape of something that had been built while she was busy planning it, not by her, despite her. Through the accumulation of 48 hours of small adjustments and late-night conversations and wind, breaks woven from borrowed materials and drone interceptions, executed by someone who did not explain his clearance level, and simply did what needed doing. She was still thinking about this when Koss said quietly, "Good squad. It was the simplest possible assessment. It was accurate." Reyes said nothing. Dasa made the soft Fenric vocalization again, and this time Veth recognized what it was. It was the sound Fenric made when they were exactly where they intended to be. Prin's patches settled into the deep blue of preparedness and stayed there, steady as a held breath. Veth looked at the data cache unit, secure and sealed and extracted ahead of schedule, and at the 5 people who had extracted it, and she was aware that 11 months of careful planning had produced something she had not planned for and could not have planned for, because the thing she had not planned for was not a capability or a score or a strategic variable. It was the feeling of sitting in the dark with people who had your flank without needing to be asked. She filed that in the category she had created 2 days ago, the one that kept filling up. The Proctor ran its 2 final pressure air events, drone sweeps, token escalation, the system closing its evaluation window by the book. The squad held position. Nobody moved unnecessarily. Nobody spoke unnecessarily. 12 hours passed. The evaluation window closed. The extraction unit was intact. All 6 members present. Objectives complete. In the final 2 hours before the window closed, the Proctor made one last attempt, a calibration class pressure event, the kind reserved for squads that had performed above predicted parameters, in which the system ran not to break them but to establish a more accurate ceiling. A low-altitude atmospheric disturbance, sudden, with a wind shear component that degraded scanner range by 60% and turned the base perimeter into a monitoring gap. In the old plan, the plan Veth had built before Reyes joins the squad, this event would have required all members to collapse inward to the base's most sheltered position and wait out the shear window. 40 minutes of reduced capability, static, exposed to secondary escalation if the Proctor chose to stack another pressure on top. In the plan as it existed now, with Reyes's terrain analysis and the shelter positions he had identified, the squad already occupied an elevated outcropping with natural windbreak geometry that reduced the shear impact to a strong gust and a mild scanner flicker. They sat through it. Dasa played a Fenric counting game with one set of hands, while the other set ran a slow equipment check. Koss updated her position map. Prin monitored the atmospheric data. Reyes sat with his back against the mineral outcropping and his eyes closed, which was either rest or a form of processing that did not require his visual cortex. Veth watched the scanner and the wind and the closing evaluation window, and she thought, "We prepared for this. Not because I knew the Proctor would run this specific event, but because we prepared well enough that it did not matter what event the Proctor ran." The wind passed. The scanner range restored itself. The evaluation window indicator dropped to 0 and held. The Proctor's acknowledgement chime sounded once, clean and without commentary, and Sector 9 simulation parameters began shutting down around them like a tide going out. The Crucible was over. Commandant Vrethosk had not moved from his position across the table. The recording lens still held its steady blue eye on Veth's face. Outside the debriefing room's single window, the Academy's morning light was beginning to turn the sky from gray to silver. "The squad's final score," the Commandant said. 94.7, Veth said, with the cohesion multiplier applied. "Highest Crucible result in this cohort. Second highest in Academy records for a 6-member squad in Sector 9 parameters." The Commandant's stylus moved across the record pad. He did not look up. "And your assessment of Cadet Reyes's contribution to that result?" Veth considered the question for 3 seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than she had needed for any other question in the debriefing. "Significant," she said, "across multiple categories." "That is not a specific answer." "No," she agreed, "it isn't." The full debriefing had begun 6 hours after the Crucible's evaluation window closed, with all 6 squad members in individual sessions. Veth had known the Commandant's focus when she walked in. She had known it from the questions about Reyes that had begun within the first 15 minutes, the careful attention with which the Commandant had recorded her descriptions of the drone intercept, the extraction approach, the infrasound navigation sequence. There was something official happening here that was larger than a post-Crucible evaluation. She did not need to know the specifics to recognize the shape. His tactical assessments during the preparation phase, the commandant said, were they accurate? Consistently. He identified the toxin bloom timeline within a margin of 4 hours. The shelter position selection gave us a strategic advantage the Proctor had not waded into its first escalation window. The extraction window adjustment was operationally sound. Based on your own assessment or on results? Both. Veth folded her arms in the Theshian formal position. The assessments were analytically rigorous. I verified their premises independently before accepting them. They held. The commandant made a note, and his behavior under direct pressure. The drone intercept, he was effective. She paused. More effective than his public training record would suggest. His training record, the commandant said carefully, is a partial document. I had already concluded that. The commandant set his stylus down. It was the first time in 6 hours that he had set it down. The gesture had the quality of a deliberate shift in register, from recording officer to person. He looked at her directly, his Theshian eyes carrying the particular depth of expression that her species' facial structure made possible and that most other species could not read. Cadet Veth, he said. What I am about to tell you is not part of the official record of this debriefing. It will not be in the documentation. I am telling you because you are the highest scoring strategic coordinator this academy has produced in 6 years, and because you have spent 72 hours working alongside someone whose full file you were not cleared to see, and you deserve to know what you were working with. Veth's secondary eyelids drew. She waited. Marcus Reyes is not a standard exchange cadet, the commandant said. He is a qualified combat specialist who completed his primary military qualification on Earth 4 years ago, at the age of 17. His scores in tactical assessment, environmental adaptation, and sustained operational performance are all in the top fraction of a % of his species' military evaluation data. He was placed in this cohort on an observational basis, not to be evaluated, but to evaluate. The room was very quiet. To evaluate what? Veth said. The Academy's integration protocols, whether a cadet of his capability profile could be absorbed into a standard cohort without destabilizing the squad dynamics around him. Whether the cohesion multiplier system would hold under conditions of significant capability asymmetry. Veth was still for 4 seconds. Then, he knew his scores were blank. Yes, he knew what the blank field would signal to me. Yes. He sat across from me in the preparation bay and showed me terrain notations on a paper map and discussed infrasound navigation and never mentioned that he could have planned the entire operation himself from memory. The commandant said nothing. Veth looked at the table between them, at the recording lens with its steady blue eye, at her own folded arms, the formal Theshian rest position that most other species read as mild, arrogance and which was actually, she acknowledged privately, sometimes mild arrogance and sometimes the posture she defaulted to when she needed to hold herself together from the inside. He was not hiding capability, she said slowly. He was integrating. He was identifying the places where his capability could fit into the existing architecture without displacing what was already there. That is my assessment, the commandant said. Yes. She thought about the paper map and the 90-minute conversation and the 4 hours of sleep she had finally gotten, and about the left flank covered without being asked, and the drone intercept completed without explanation, and the windbreak, woven in 12 minutes from materials that were just there in the vegetation. She thought about Dasa's 4 arms uncrossing without coordination, Prin's patches going vivid gold in the dark, Koss saying good squad in the quietest possible voice. She thought about the category she had created for things she had not planned for. He could have led the operation, she said. Yes. He didn't. No. She unfolded her arms, an involuntary movement, the Theshian equivalent of exhaling. Why not? The commandant picked up his stylus. That, he said, is what the evaluation was testing. Not whether he could lead, whether he could choose not to. The debriefing concluded 20 minutes later with procedural efficiency. Veth signed the assessment form, confirmed her contact information for the formal scoring notification, and walked out into the academy's morning. The sky was fully silver now, the kind of clear, diffuse light that came before the sun had fully committed to the day. She stood in the open courtyard outside the debriefing block and let the light hit her crystalline surface structures. A Theshian instinct, the same way other species turn their faces to the warmth. Footsteps was behind her. She did not need to turn to know who it was. Reyes stopped beside her. He was still in his Crucible kit, minus the equipment pack. She was too. Neither of them had been back to quarters yet. He stood with the same quality of being that he always had, quiet as geological substrate, and looked at the silver sky. "You knew I'd figure it out eventually," Veth said. "It was not an accusation. It was a plain statement of observable fact." "I knew you'd figure it out before the debriefing was over," he said. "You're fast. You could have told me." "Operationally, no. The evaluation parameters required authentic integration conditions. If you'd known my actual scores going in, you'd have restructured the entire plan around me as the primary tactical element. That would have told the evaluators something about the plan, not about the squad, and the blank field. The blank field was designed to make me plan around what I thought was a gap. Yes." She looked at the sky. "That is a very specific kind of manipulation." "Yes," he said again. He did not apologize for it. She found, examining her reaction honestly, that she did not require an apology. Manipulation implied a kind of hostility that had not been present. He had worked within the rules of a system she had consented to by being in the academy, and he had done it with a care for the outcome that she could not reasonably object to, given that the outcome was 94.7 and all 6 members present. "Dasa," she said. "She knew something was unusual about you. She had that expression 2 or 3 times during the operation." "Fenric are good at reading capability levels," Reyes said. "She clocked mine around hour 6. She decided not to say anything. Because? Because she was watching what you were doing with the squad, and she didn't want to interfere with it." A pause. "Those are her words, by the way. We spoke at the extraction point while you were flagging completion." Veth processed that. Dasa had known and had protected the architecture. Prin's deep blue preparedness during the drone intercept. That had not been the expression of a medic braced for casualties. That had been a medic who understood what was happening and was holding steady around it. Koss's navigator's calm was Koss's navigator's calm. But Koss had positioned her chair between Reyes and the common room entrance during Orvansek's confrontation, and that was not navigation, that was something else. They had all been doing it, absorbing and integrating and holding the architecture around a variable they had each understood better than she had, in their own ways, and none of them had said anything because they had seen what she was building and they had built it with her. "I planned a squad," Veth said. "You did," Reyes said. "I planned it based on complementary capability profiles. I selected members based on performance metrics and skill distribution." "Yes. And then all of those members independently made decisions during the operation that were not covered by my planning, and those decisions were correct, and they produced results that my planning alone would not have reached." Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's usually how it works." She turned to look at him. He was watching the sky with the same arithmetic expression, ordinary calculations, the kind you run in a new room when you are automatically noting the exits. But she understood it better now. He was not noting the exits. He was noting the structure, where things were, how they fit together, what they could bear. "In my pre-operation analysis," she said, "I identified your blank field as the primary variable I could not account for. I know. I was wrong about what the variable was." He looked at her. His dark brown eyes held the question. "The variable was not your capability," she said. "The variable was what a squad does when it stops being a plan and starts being a thing that breathes." She paused. "I have been at this academy for 3 years, and I have been building plans for 3 years, and I did not understand that distinction until 72 hours ago." The silver sky held steady above the courtyard. Somewhere in the academy's main building, other cadets were moving through their morning routines, eating, filing, preparing for the evaluation results that would post at midday. "What happens now?" she said. "Your evaluation is complete. You'll be reassigned." "Probably," he said. "Squad 7's Crucible is over. Whatever was built during it." She stopped, chose more precise words. "The cohesion multiplier is a scoring mechanism. It doesn't have a formal continuation protocol." "No," he agreed. They stood in the silver morning for a moment. The courtyard was quiet. Somewhere a door opened, and she heard Dasa's 4-armed gate crossing the stone. that particular rhythm that she had learned to identify over 48 hours of operating together, and then a slower sound that was Koss and Prin's lighter step behind them. They came through the courtyard door and stopped when they saw Veth and Reyes standing in the light. Das's upper arms opened in the Fenric gesture she now understood meant recalibration of categories, and then Dasa crossed the courtyard and stood beside them, and Koss came after, and Prin settled close enough that her bioluminescent patches added their amber warmth to the group's ambient light. Nobody said anything. There was nothing that needed to be said. The Crucible was over, and the evaluation was complete, and the Academy's morning was moving forward on its ordinary schedule, and 6 people were standing in a silver courtyard because they were standing in a silver courtyard, and that was sufficient reason. Veth looked at the group around her, at the architecture she had built from plans and the thing that had grown inside, those plans from somewhere she had not designed. She thought about the Commandant's question, "What is your assessment of Cadet Reyes's contribution?" And she thought that the answer she had given was accurate but incomplete. His contribution was not to the score, though the score was real. His contribution was not to the tactical plan, though the plan was better for his additions. His contribution was what happened when someone chose, deliberately, not to lead, not out of deference or limitation, but because the thing being built was more valuable than the credit for building it, and he understood that with the same clarity he had used to read the topographic map and identify infrasound navigation patterns and disable 3 drones in the darkness of an adversarial probe. He had seen the structure, he had fit himself into it without displacing what was already there. He had covered the left flank and said nothing and done the work and trusted the plan to become what plans become when the people inside them are. Doing that same thing, fitting, holding, covering, trusting. Veth's secondary eyelids drew once slowly and then opened. "Midday," she said. "Results post. Then we'll know where we land on the cohort ranking." "Second highest in Academy records," Koss said, with the precise flatness of someone who considers observable facts sufficient. "For a 6-member squad in Sector 9 parameters," Veth said. Dasa made the soft Fenric vocalization, the one that meant they were exactly where they intended to be. Reyes said nothing. He was watching the sky, doing arithmetic, the quiet kind, and Veth thought that whatever calculation he was running, it was probably correct, and she was not going to ask him to explain it, because she was beginning to understand that some variables disclose themselves over time without requiring interrogation. She could afford to wait. The silver morning turned gold at its edges, the sun finally committing to the day, and Squad 7 stood in it together. And the Academy's record board was going to post 94.7 at midday, and Veth was already thinking about the next valuation cycle. Not planning it exactly, not yet, but feeling the shape of it, the way the geological substrate of Sector 9 had spoken to her in the dark, the shape of something that could be built if the right people were in the room. She already knew where to start looking for them. In the Commandant's debriefing room, the recording lens clicked off at 0847 hours. The transcript would be filed in Reyes's sealed evaluation dossier, flagged for review by the Academy's Integration Program Committee, and marked not for retention pressure, meaning the committee would read it, note the results, and make no adjustments to an experiment that had clearly worked. The transcript's final logged entry was Veth's last statement before signing the assessment form. The Commandant had asked, "Is there anything else you want the evaluation record to include?" Veth had said, "Yes." The squad's performance was a collective result. No single member's contribution is separable from the others. Any analysis that attributes the outcome to one variable, including Cadet Reyes's unlogged capabilities, will be analytically incomplete. The Commandant had written it down exactly as she said it. It was, he noted privately, the most precise summary of the Crucible's intended lesson that any cadet had ever given in a post-evaluation debrief. He filed it accordingly. Outside in the silver morning, Squad 7 stood in the courtyard and watched the day arrive, and did not need to be anywhere else.